A concert this evening in Horse Guards Parade, the finale of this week's commemorations of this day in 1945, a day when fascism in Europe was defeated. As Big Ben struck 9 p.m, the King spoke to a nation just as his grandfather had done to a war-weary population 80 years ago tonight. George VI was famously not a great orator, but he considered it his duty to speak on a day when victory in Europe had been declared.
Germany, the enemy who drove all Europe into war, has been finally overcome.
Referencing how his grandfather had hailed the passing of the dreadful shadow of war, King Charles spoke of the generation which made that victory possible.
His words echo down through history. While our greatest debt is owed to all those who paid the ultimate price, we should never forget how the war changed the lives of virtually everyone.
Earlier, at the grave of the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey, the King and Queen, alongside the Prince and Princess of Wales, gathered around the spot which represents sacrifice from all wars, and silence fell in this great royal church and in locations around the country. And as at other events this week, an acknowledgement that the stories of those who lived through World War II will survive in those born in a different era.
Let us pray for the welfare of veterans.
Joyce Wilding is now 100. The great-great-grandson of Winston Churchill, Alexander, is 10.
It feels really amazing that I can represent my family and also the younger generation to know and remember everyone in World War II.
Joyce Wilding, meanwhile, sitting with her grandson after the service, is still able to remember this day in 1945.
It was just so full of people cheering and singing, with soldiers climbing up the lampposts, because it was a relief, and it was just wondrous after so many years of gloom.
The scenes on the streets of London and across the country that day lived long in the memory. The royal family came onto the balcony 8 times, such was the demand from those who'd gathered at Buckingham Palace. And the young Princess Elizabeth famously slipped out anonymously into the crowds and congered with them into the early hours. Something her son said tonight he could not promise to match.
I do hope your celebrations tonight are almost as joyful, although I rather doubt I shall have the energy to sing until 2 a.m, let alone, for that matter, to lead you all in a giant conga from here back to Buckingham Palace.
Once again, buildings of national significance were bathed in red, white and blue this evening. A thank you to a generation who overcame the odds, whose sacrifice should not and will not be forgotten.
And Chris, the King centre stage tonight as the royal family has been through the week of commemorations.
Yes, that's right, Gamal. The royal family have led these commemorations all week, in particular the King. But you know what I think really struck me? Whilst they might have led those commemorations, it's the veterans who have been centre stage. When I looked round tonight at the royal box at that concert, there either side of the King and Queen were some Second World War veterans, as there was at the very beginning of this week on Bank Holiday Monday at the end of the Mall here during that big procession for VE Day then. And I think the other thing that really strikes you about this week is kind of the handing over of the baton. When you've got veterans now clearly in their 90s and their hundreds, and there were many of those there tonight, but it is that moment of passing on those stories to a new generation. The responsibility falls to a younger generation now. You saw that in Westminster Abbey earlier, and also even earlier in the week when Prince George was taken to meet some of these veterans himself as well. So look, the King tonight was reflecting his father's words that he gave at 9 o'clock on the 8th of May 1945, but also making the very important point that yes, peace then, But what about now, and what have we learned from what happened 80 years ago?
Chris at Buckingham Palace, many thanks indeed. Well, like 80 years ago, the celebrations weren't, of course, confined to London. At the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, the Royal British Legion put on a tea party. The guests of honour were 46 veterans who had fought for their country during the Second World War. Across the Channel, there was a parade through Paris. The French had their day's commemorative holiday today. President Macron presided over the wreath-laying ceremony. And VE Day in Europe was supposed to mark the start of a 3-day ceasefire, but despite Russia's promises, its bombs kept falling. For Ukrainians, this big anniversary is an uncomfortable one, remembering the end of a war in Europe waged by a dictator while living through something similar.
As a war of the past is remembered, a war of the present is waged. This the latest Russian attack on Ukraine. President Putin has declared a 3-day truce, but that seems to have no place in reality. The Ukrainians say it's been breached over 700 times, and it only began last night. That appeared not to trouble the Russian leader nor his Chinese counterpart, meeting today in Moscow, strengthening ties between the two nations, both with a shared antipathy for the West. They pledged to stand together to protect international fairness and justice. As a continent celebrated lives lived in peace, Ukraine contemplated peace at this time of war. Those leading the country's defence do so in the belief that they, like those who went before, are fighting for the freedom of Europe. Beyond the ceremony, President Zelensky today offered his view of this day whilst walking through the streets of Kyiv, still free, despite Russia's wish to occupy it within days of this offensive starting.
So this was the trench you were in?
For those fighting the war of today, the war of yesterday is a moment of reflection and fear for the future.
This is the most massive war in the 21st century. We all need to learn and get experience, because Russia will not stop. It will do harm everywhere and all the time.
The war being waged here in Ukraine is the biggest conflict in Europe since VE Day delivered peace. One day, this conflict will also be part of the past, but for now, it is very much part of the present, and a reminder of the brutality and futility of war, whatever year it is fought. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Kyiv.